When it comes to movies based on comics and graphic novels, one slightly contentious topic that comes up quite a lot is loyalty to the source material. It's not uncommon for media like this to make fairly significant changes to plot elements, characters, and tone, which understandably sparks a lot of debate. Some people praise the willingness to build on existing material, giving it a fresh new identity without having to stick so rigidly to what came before. Others, however, will complain about getting a product that doesn't resemble the stories that it claims to be based on, while also robbing those stories of the chance to be exposed to a wider audience who don't read comics. Which, let's face facts, is a lot of people. But that's mainly to do with the more well-known live-action movies. There's actually another type of comic book movie that goes in a bit of a different direction. Those being the direct-to-home media animated films. These are distinct in that they often directly adapt storylines from the comics. Granted, they make some changes here and there, and some are more successful than others, but there is generally a reasonable attempt to capture what the original material was actually like. There is one comic book turned animated film, however, that initially seems like it's going in that direction, but actually turns out to be a lot more different than you might expect. That being the Batman story, Gotham by Gaslight. Originally released in 1989 by writer Brian Augustin and artist Mike Mignola, this comic takes place in an alternate version of the DC universe, featuring Batman and pals in a late 19th century Gotham City and investigating the crimes of the infamous real-world killer Jack the Ripper. It's a good comic with an art style that mixes typical Batman visual design with the sort of half-dingy, half-elegant aesthetic of the late 1800s, even if Bruce Wayne looks like a Simpsons character in a few early panels. Not to mention, it's a brilliant premise taking Batman, the world's greatest detective, and putting him on the trail of one of history's most mysterious criminals who, still to this day, has never been identified. Having said all that though, in this pseudo-intellectual's opinion, it's far from perfect for two main reasons. The first being that, while I think the setting is an interesting idea, I just don't think that this version of Gotham is as fleshed out as it could be. The book mentions the excessive crime rate in Gotham that would necessitate Bruce Wayne's role as Batman, but doesn't really show it. We see him stop a few crimes here and there, but they're generally shown to be isolated incidents without any indication of larger systemic problems with Gotham or people in undeserved positions of power that would result in high levels of crime. It doesn't help that none of Jack the Ripper's victims in the story are proper characters, but instead are just background extras with no dialogue, personality traits, or role within the story, which makes their deaths feel inconsequential, as heartless as that sounds. Speaking of Jack the Ripper, while he does have some creepiness and mystique about him, he's also the second and biggest issue that I have with this comic. I won't give away who he's revealed to be at the end of the book, but suffice it to say, during the character's first scene, I immediately guessed it was him. Not to mention, when his motivation is finally told at the end of the comic, it's basically just glanced over in a few lines of narration, and it doesn't contribute to any larger theme of the story, like any aspect of the world building or an ideology that Batman is fighting against, so it honestly feels pretty weak. That's not to say that the story doesn't work, because there are still interesting challenges that Batman has to struggle with and overcome, but it is still a shame that with a villain as ripe for interpretation as Jack the Ripper, they don't do much with him. Overall, it's a decent little comic, but I must admit that I think the premise is more exciting than what it ended up being. That, however, leads me to the animated movie released in 2018. Considering everything I've said regarding the original comic and the fact that this is a direct adaptation instead of just being loosely constructed from different elements of the Batman mythos like a lot of Batman movies, it begs the question of how close is this movie going to stick to the source material, as well as how close should it stick to it? Well, to put it bluntly, the plot of the movie is pretty much completely different. The basic premise and setting are the same, late 19th century, Jack the Ripper, etc., but the plot beats, the cast of characters, even the reveal of who the villain is are original. And I'll be honest, pretty much all of it is for the better. First of all, the world building is much better. There's a much larger set of characters from the Batman franchise who contribute to the themes of the story. We have Selina Kyle, who investigates the Ripper case alongside Batman due to sympathizing with the typical destitute victims due to her own history of being abused and desire to help those without power.
You look after all the strays in Skinner's End.
Someone has to. They don't have anyone else to protect them.
There's a trio of orphans living in the street who are forced into crime just to survive, only to become allies to Batman later on in the story. And their names are Dick, Jason, and Tim, the names of the first 3 Robins in the main DC universe. Even in this alternate world, they're still helping and being helped by Batman.
Good job. Now go.
There's Harvey Dent, Gotham's district attorney, claiming to be working to serve the people of Gotham while secretly turning a blind eye to those in need and acting towards his own selfish interests. Two-faced, I guess you could call him.
I think you're ignoring the real tragedy here. Every establishment in town is closing down.
On top of making the world building a bit more elaborate, it also helps to add some much needed sense of theme to the story. All of these characters, in some way or another, are associated with the impoverished, underprivileged, or just citizens of Gotham who have otherwise been left behind by society. Whether they be part of that demographic, empathetic to them, or the type to look down on them, this helps to create an actual ideological conflict between Batman, who serves as a hero to those people, and the Ripper, who sees them as pests who need to be wiped out. The Ripper's crimes are also given a bit more impact in this version, as a number of the victims are actually characters with personalities and roles in the story outside of being killed. Not to mention being people that the characters in the story care about, and the film makes an effort to make you care about as well. The most notable victim in the story is Sister Leslie, this universe's version of Leslie Tompkins, one of Batman's less extravagant allies. It's established early on that she's known Bruce since childhood and has been a guiding force throughout his entire life. She's also close to the other characters in the story, as she has a reputation in Gotham for helping those in need, even if it ruffles a few feathers from those at the top who think they're not worth it.
If I didn't have Sister Leslie when my parents... Funding the orphanage is the least I could do.
She's pretty much the heart of the story, and when she meets her untimely end at the hands of the Ripper, you buy that a significant force for good in Gotham has been snuffed out.
Know this. I forgive you.
There's also a drunk, elderly woman named Marlene who becomes a victim after you get to know her a little. She, in her own way, also plays into the theme a small bit with the fact that, sure, she's not the most wholesome person living in Gotham, but she doesn't deserve to die. Although saying that, it's probably for the best that she's not in the movie very much. She's played by Tara Strong, who is a talented voice actress, but it's impossible for me to listen to the voice she does in this without hearing Harley Quinn, which is a little distracting.
5-man Skinner's ends, everybody knows me. You were supposed to save Mr. J, Bat Brain.
The last point I want to talk about is the reveal near the end of the movie about who Jack the Ripper actually is. Ordinarily, I don't bother with spoiler warnings for movies that are several years old, but since this is a relatively obscure film, I'll cut you some slack and say skip to the time on screen.
Spoilers.
It's Jim Gordon. I'm not joking. In this version of the DC universe, while Gordon may present himself as a stoic but noble police officer that we all know him as, in reality, he's a psychotic serial killer butchering innocent people that he believes are polluting civilization in Gotham.
I promised the people of Gotham to clean the scum off the streets.
It's a creative decision that I could see a viewer going either way with. If someone told me that they didn't like this twist because they saw it as a betrayal of who Jim Gordon is as a character, I'd understand. From my own perspective though, I really love this twist, particularly for how it plays the audience's expectation of the Batman franchise against them. Gordon has almost always been depicted pretty much the exact same way in any Batman story, no matter the continuity for decades, and for most of this story, that seems to still be the case. But on the other hand, this is a non-canon, alternate universe specifically created to explore possibilities that wouldn't exist in the mainline DC universe. Plus, in a weird way, it does kind of fit with Jim Gordon as a character. After all, the Ripper's goal in the film is to eliminate what he perceives as corruption within his city. In a twisted way, isn't that what being a police officer is? Now, in all fairness, I wouldn't say that Gotham by Gaslight is a fantastic movie. It is still leaning a lot on the novelty of the premise to keep you entertained, and the themes and characters themselves aren't exactly the deepest things in the world, especially compared to some of the best Batman movies. The message of the story ultimately amounts to, just because someone exists in a lower class, that doesn't mean they're inhuman. I agree with it, but it is a fairly simplistic message. Nonetheless though, it's a message that gives the story a much greater sense of purpose and is good enough to keep you entertained for the relatively short 74-minute runtime. This all raises the question though, can I reasonably call this a good adaptation when so much of it is so fundamentally different from the original? Absolutely. It may not be entirely accurate in terms of the objective events of the plot, but what it is faithful to is the idea. The film captures the two main draws of the original material, the alternate take on a world and characters we all know and love, and the battle between one of fiction's most popular detectives and one of history's most notorious criminals. It doesn't so much ignore the source material as much as it focuses on the most defining elements and, in my opinion, improving the rest. I'd say if you're interested in Gotham by Gaslight in any capacity, but you can only choose the one, this is the version to go with. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters Heather Reed, Zelda, Radio Peo, Moon Goddesses, Will, Blueberry Cello, and Seth M. Thank you so much for the support. If you'd like to see your name in the credits, along with early access to scripts and videos, as well as exclusive unused video thumbnails, or if you'd just like to chat with me, consider supporting me on Patreon for just $1.50 a month. The link is in the description.